Welcome.
A guest. Prestige guest.
We've got lights, we've got cameras, we've got real guests. This is
real
amazing.
Live people for the first time ever. Oh my god, okay. Well, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, I'm Megan Connor. I happen to be the cousin of Lori Vallow, although that is not my most interesting quality.
Absolutely not. The more we've been talking, I'm like, whoa, how do you do all the things that you do? This is wild.
That has to be tough having that attached to your name forever.
Yeah, I mean, it is and it isn't. I mean, I'm lucky that I don't actually have any of the names that she has, and so that makes it a little bit easier. And it also is good that I'm kind of outside of the whole family system, and so, not a lot of people know that about me. I guess now a lot of people do, but because I've been talking about it a lot. But yeah, it's kind of hard to wrap your brain around the fact that somebody that you know and spent time with and or at least knew who they were. That's really hard to come to grips with, the idea that somebody did all of these horrible things. So that's hard.
Yeah, that was kind of my first question, and I'm sure it is partly why you wrote your book. But how do you? Because I feel like the things I've gone through in my life, it's so hard to truly, I don't know, move on or not have them come back to what's been your process?
Yeah, so, I mean, I wrote my book long before the Lori thing happened, and it's largely about my healing from trauma. And I had a lot of childhood trauma, obviously grew up in a very toxic family system, and then that became comfortable to me. And so I started surrounding myself with other situations that were familiar, that felt comfortable. So, at one point, I had a conversation with my dad that sort of snapped me out of it. And because I had sort of dissociated from it and minimized everything, I was like, oh, that sucked, but it wasn't that bad, But after that conversation with my dad, I really couldn't pretend anymore, because I was like, okay, he knows what really happened. And so therefore I sort of have to admit it. And that was the first time that I reached out for therapeutic help. And thank goodness I went to a non-LDS therapist so that I could completely remove religion from it and just look at it from a clinical mental health standpoint. Mm-hmm. So all of the mental health work that I've done, I kind of was already at a very good, happy place when all of this crazy stuff started happening. So I had sort of built this life that I really enjoyed and loved and everything, and that part of the family was a very distant part of it. It was I kept in touch with them to a certain degree, mostly on social media, but I kept just really healthy boundaries because I didn't want that stuff in my life anymore. And then it sort of came back to me against my will.
Sorry if our questioning jumps around a bit,
No
but
worries.
How old were you when you first got therapy?
I was 35.
Okay. And how old were you when the incident happened where Stacy died?
I think I was 25.
Oh, whoa, okay.
Yeah. I was pretty young, relatively young, and, as a young mom, and was just starting to see aspects of coercive control in my marriage. And so I was really, I was not in a place where I could connect the dots of the things that happened. And my sister and I are really close, and we kind of process things together. We were talking about this idea that we both felt like we were sort of under anesthesia as kids growing up and as young adults, because we just sort of went through life and it was this is how it is, and our family is great. And when something bad happens, it's oh my gosh, that's crazy. And nobody really acknowledges it, and everybody minimizes it. And then everybody tells an official version of the story that leaves out all the unpleasant parts that make everybody else look bad. And so it's sort of this little package that we portray to everybody else. And that's why you heard a lot in the media, people talking about Lori saying, oh my gosh, she was such a great mom and she was so wonderful. And we always saw her as such a, devoted mother and a good person and everything. But that's because that's the official packaged version.
And what was the version that you saw?
Well, I found out very early on when I was a young adult, when we lived together, that it was not a good idea to anger Lori, to cross her, to make her upset. She really could be vicious. And I think she really sort of ran the family system in a lot of ways, because even though obviously like her dad was overbearing and controlling a lot, it seemed like when Lori said something, that's what everybody accepted. Yeah, her dad's Barry. Okay. Yeah. But yeah, like when Lori told you, don't talk to this person, it meant two things. It meant, one, I don't want you to hear their version of the story. Mm-hmm. And two, if you do talk to them, that's completely disloyal to me and I will never speak to you again. Mm-hmm. And that was very prominent throughout her teenage, young adult, young mom years. Like the whole time I knew her, that was the way that she was.
Did she always have new enemies or people she was, smoking, painting, asking you not to talk to?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And it was always, I mean, at least the things that I know about, when you think about her husbands, it was almost always like she wanted something different than what the situation was. And so she created a story about the situation that she then told to everybody else, parts of which were true, but most of which was her version of it. And so, and then she would tell us this story and she would demand that we all adopt the story. And that's definitely what happened when she divorced Joe, who was her third husband. And that was about the time that I checked out, because I heard some of the things that were coming out during their divorce and I couldn't make sense of it. I didn't know who was telling the truth. And it was these horrible accusations of SA against her kids by her husband. Oof. And I was like, I don't know what to do or say with any of this. And I was going through my own garbage at the time. So I was like, I'm just going to back away. Mm-hmm. And we didn't really have a whole lot of contact after that.
What do you think gave her that power in your family system? Like, what was it about her or the role she played?
That's a really great question. I think when you're coming from a family that values appearance over everything else, physical beauty, intelligence, and the ability to charm and to draw people in, that gives her a lot of power in that family system. And so...
she's beautiful and charming.
Yes, exactly. So, I mean, as a kid, she was always like the cheerleader and, very, blonde-haired, blue-eyed. Everybody was attracted to her. And then, later in her teenage years, she wanted to do modeling and she had a portfolio. And so that was kind of the track she was on, was like using her beauty to get the things that she wanted, whether it was attention or power or whatever. And so I think that's a big part of it. I think it was what we value as a family she possesses. And she also demands that we all sort of like follow her, what she wants. It's like, I think that comes from, I'm not a psychiatrist, but when you have a father who demands a certain thing from you or you're not acceptable, you want to become that thing so that you have his approval and acceptance. And I think that was a big part of it.
In our video we made about Lori Vallow, I sort of was under the impression at the time that Chad had sort of radicalized her, and before then maybe she was more of like a normal, nice mother. But your Mormon Stories interview, which everyone should listen to if they haven't already, it was specifically the story of, I don't remember who hit the cat, but like Lori laughing at the cat was, obviously, that was when it hit me. Like, okay, this isn't a person that just got radicalized. This is someone that, has always been a certain way. Was that your impression of her? Was her behavior like so normal to you growing up that you didn't see her as anything out of the ordinary? Like she didn't stick out as...
Well, so first of all, it was her boyfriend who hit the cat. He was the one who was driving the car. But it was everybody in the car who was like going along with that sort of feeling of like, this was funny, you know? So that, it was just very odd to me. I obviously was traumatized by it, but nobody else was. So as I was looking around the car and everybody else was laughing, I was like, what's wrong with me? And that's kind of how it was too with anybody in our family who acted like they were in control or had power or had any sort of influence. If I wasn't like that, I would go, what's wrong with me? And so when I would spend time with Lori and Summer and they would act a certain way or they would do certain things, like I remember the first time that they wanted to skip out of the third hour of church and go to Del Taco, I was like, oh my gosh, you can do that? I was like, I had no idea. I was like, what's been wrong with me this whole time? You know, I keep going to the third hour of church when I could be eating tacos instead.
And that is a really good point, I think.
I think that's really why they narrowed it down to 2 hours, because the third hour is taco hour. Exactly. That's where we should all be during the third hour. No, but it was like that. I think I looked at the way that Lori was and saw that she was beautiful and saw that she was on some level acceptable to her parents. And I didn't feel acceptable to my parents. So it was, my striving was always like, I want to be more acceptable to my parents. Mm-hmm. And I knew that Lori's family was like very different from my family, and that my parents sort of did have a little bit of judgment for the way that their family ran, like with the bikinis and all of that kind of stuff. But I was like, I like any teenage kid, I didn't really know how to find acceptance and belonging. And so I was looking for it wherever I could. So when, you know, Lori would say something, I would go along with it because I wanted to belong. Mm-hmm. You know, I think we all sort of do that when we have deficiencies in the attachments with our parents. Yeah. So.
And as kids, we don't like learn how to identify. You're not like categorizing behaviors as problematic or anything. You're just experiencing, and it's later in life when you're like, oh my God, there's so much to unpack, and a whole language used to understand what's happening. And it sounds like both in this instance, you know, you said like, unfortunately connected, you know, through you in that way, but it like highlights this really dark side of toxic family systems in a way that you, in your personal and professional life, seem to be like really shining a light, and even disconnected from Lori. Like, how do we improve what's going on here, and talk about intelligently and compassionately about that process. Yeah,
I think that it's really hard for people who grow up in those systems to recognize it, because, and even for me especially, I had no idea that it was wrong or bad or unhealthy. It was just the only thing that I knew. Mm-hmm. And even looking at other people's families, I made the assumption that their families were just like mine. So it wasn't until, and this became a pattern throughout my entire life. When I removed myself from a situation and looked at it from the outside, I was able to see things about it that were unhealthy. So it wasn't until I left my parents' home that I was able to recognize unhealthy things about our relationship. It wasn't until I left my marriage, like not when I got divorced, but I actually spent several weeks away from my spouse and children, which is a totally different story. But I was an opera singer, and I was singing in the summer, and I spent 3 weeks away.
You're also an opera singer?
I was. It was a different time. It was a different life. But I spent 3 weeks in this performance, you know, thing, and I was away from my marriage and my kids for the first time, and I was able to sort of like look around me at the other relationships people had and go, oh my gosh, there's a lot that's unhealthy there. And it was the same thing with church. When COVID hit, it was like I was out for a long enough time that I was like, oh my gosh, I'm not going back to that, you know? Mm-hmm. So I think that it's really important for all of us as human beings to sort of get outside of ourselves and outside of our routines and start examining things and say, like, is this healthy? Is this something I really want to continue to keep in my life? Or am I just keeping it out of dogma? Is it here just because it always has been, mm-hmm. you know? And I think some of the happiest choices that I've made in my life and the things that I feel most peaceful and centered about are the things that, like, I removed everything from my life that felt abusive or oppressive, and then I gradually started adding things back in under the auspices of like, is this healthy for me? Is this something I want going forward? And I continue to re-examine as I go, because it's really easy to fall into patterns and do the familiar thing, and then before you know it, time has passed, and it's like, what am I doing?
Yeah. I like that you mentioned getting out of routines, because I do feel like, the actual physical space is so good for like re-reckoning with stuff, but also I feel like the brain does well when there's novelty. So just putting yourself in a new situation, it kind of does seem to unlock the brain a bit more.
It's the beauty of change, you know, doing something different. And I think as human beings, we're like wired for change. Like the seasons change, and our bodies change as we age, and all of those things. And so many of us are scared of that. It's like, I want things to just stay the same. But when we do that, I think we do ourselves a disservice by not allowing, things to be different and to accept that things are always going to change, and sometimes that's the best thing for us.
Yeah.
So true. I saw this quote recently. I wish I could remember who it was. It was like, everything that doesn't change will eventually self-destruct. And I was like, that's so true. Have you read Woman Who Run with the Wolves?
No.
Okay, it's just a theme of that book is like the life, death, life, nature, constant rebirth. And
I love that. Yeah. That's cool.
So you mentioned that your family system was very like appearance focused, was all about, you told that story of Janice. Is Janice the name of Lori's mom?
Yeah.
Like spitting out food at the dinner table. Mm-hmm. That's like, insane.
What's the context?
She would actually say, I don't need to swallow the food, I just need to taste it. And it was like very much disordered eating kind of thing, because it's like so important to stay thin and all of that.
That'd be so hard to watch.
And it seems so I have an uncle who did that exact thing. He's dying of anorexia, but he would never do that behavior like in a family meal setting. The fact that it was just like,
it was open.
Not okay. It sounded like it was kind of okay. Like it wasn't a big deal enough that anyone was stepping in to say, what the hell?
It was very much the normalization of body shame and self-shame. Saying that like, I don't feel acceptable to myself and this is how I control it. And so I think that normalizing it maybe for Janice, and I obviously can't speak for how exactly she felt, but I'm thinking about myself with my own daughters. I want to model things for them that are healthy for them and that are going to make them happy. So maybe in Janice's mind, she was like, if I model this for my daughters, then they will also want to stay thin because that's what they valued. You know? And we do know that Stacy did have disordered eating, and that was a big contributor to a lot of her health problems. And, some family members obviously will argue with me and disagree with me on that, but it's very well documented. So
kind of just want to dive into every thread. It's tough to I want to ask you how you overcame like the body shame as a baseline, and were your parents any better than Lori's parents about that stuff? Was there much of a difference?
Better, worse, healthier, unhealthier. I think my parents had some of the same ideas but did it in a different way. Okay. I think Lori's family, it was much more in the open. And therefore, that was their way of normalizing it, as I said. For my family, it was very covert. For example, my mom, I remember when I was a freshman in high school, and I decided I wanted to run track. I have no idea why. I hate running. But at the time, it seemed like a great idea. But I remember after the first 3 weeks or so of practices when it was really intense practice where we were running a lot. And I was doing middle distances. And so we would do like a half-mile warm-up and a half-mile cool-down. And in the middle, you would run your race 3 times. And I was running the half-mile as my race. So it was a lot of running. And that was 1 day of practice. And it was 5 days a week. Whoa. And I remember after the 3rd week, and I had like shin splints, and I was in a lot of pain. I was very sore. But my mom said, oh, wow, I've noticed that since you started track, your hips have really slimmed down. And as a 14-year-old child who was this big, and, I probably weighed like 115 pounds, and for my mom to make that comment about my body, that stuck with me for a really, really long time. And when you couple that with the LDS church culture of perfectionism and like perfectionistic striving, like unhealthy striving, it became a way for me to be acceptable to my mother, to fit my body into the box that she wanted it to be in. And so it took me until I didn't really start working on my body shame issues until probably about 4 or 5 years ago. And so I had this lifelong struggle up until then, and it's something I'm still working on, of trying to make my body acceptable to some other ideal that I hadn't even thought about, like if this is what I want, And I got involved with CrossFit about probably 4 years ago, and I did it because I was looking for like a physical outlet. Like I played soccer as a young child. I played football in middle school. I ran track in high school. And then as an adult, I just wasn't doing anything like that. And it was a huge part of my life I felt was missing. So I started doing CrossFit, but it very quickly became a way for me to, again, like strive in an unhealthy way towards perfectionism because it's so intense. The workouts are so hard that I would rather injure myself and finish a workout than to be kind to my body and say, I'm going to shave a few reps so that I don't hurt myself, you know? And I got hooked up with somebody at the gym that was doing macro works, which was like a way of like saying, this is how many grams of protein, how many grams of carbs, and how many grams of fat you should have a day. And my perfectionistic tendencies just like loved that idea of keeping track of every single thing that I ate, logging it and reporting it to somebody every single week, and thriving sort of on this unhealthy feedback of like, did you hit your macros? Are you still at your, ideal weight and all this kind of stuff? And I realized that I was chasing something untenable. Like, I think as women, we sort of get programmed to think about the number on the scale. And I sort of like had this awakening that like it was not healthy for me to keep track of every single thing that I ate, and that I was just trying to do it to fit into a box. And I started detaching from that. And I was unhappy with the number on the scale. And one of my trainers like encouraged me to go look at some pictures of myself when I thought that I was a healthy weight and figure out what that was. And right when I first got divorced, I was at a weight that I liked. And so I always had that weight in my mind, like this is where I need to be. But it was like 15 pounds lighter than I was. And I'm not a big person, so that's a huge difference, right?
And you've been doing CrossFit.
And I've been doing CrossFit. And also consuming ridiculously huge amounts of protein, because that was that's what the nutritionist was telling me, right? So I found this picture of myself that I liked when I was at that weight. And I found that dress and I was like, I don't think I can fit into that dress because I'm like way heavier than I was. And I put it on and it fit perfectly. So I have this side-by-side picture of me at what I thought was a healthy weight and me at the CrossFit weight. And I'll send it to you later. It's stunning, the difference. Like there's muscle tone and definition, and over here I'm just skinny and scrawny and unhealthy and unhappy. Like you can see it on my face, So it was a reframing of what is best for me. And I was going to CrossFit at 5:30 in the morning, 5 days a week. So I made the decision to prioritize sleep first. And I'm not sure why I chose that, but it was kind of out of listening to all these healthy podcasts about like what's good for your body. And they said, like, one of the things they said is like the number one thing is sleep. If you're not getting enough sleep, nothing else is going to function. So I stopped getting up at 5 a.m. and started allowing myself to sleep until 7. And I was shocked at how different I felt after 2 weeks. And I was like, okay, so I love CrossFit, but I love sleep more. And I feel way better. So I really do miss weight training, but the more I started listening to, different things about people who actually knew what they were talking about health-wise, I started realizing that walking is like super, super healthy for you. And I was like, that in my brain, that didn't work because it was not this perfectionistic, like, if I can deadlift 180 pounds, that's what I should be doing. Right. If I can do Olympic weightlifting and if I can do like gymnastic things that are super hard and I wake up sore every morning, that's how I should feel. And I had to just give myself permission to not feel that way, to just like love my body enough to love it exactly how it was. And love my body enough to say, I know generally what is healthy. I know to avoid things like hydrogenated oils, and things like that. And I went to my doctor and did blood work, and my blood work was perfect. And so I had to remind myself that one of the most important things I learned in therapy was to trust my own instinct and to trust that I know and have what I need in order to heal myself. So I began this mindset of like, I know what's healthy to eat and what's not healthy to eat, and it's okay for me to eat a variety of foods and not feel bad about it. And to also allow myself to sleep and not feel bad about it. And to also know that I can deadlift 180 pounds, but I don't have to, I don't have to prove that to myself. So yeah, there was a lot of shame I had to overcome, and I'm still working on it. I still have to remind myself that it's okay for me to not push my body to the absolute limit of exhaustion and just punish myself every day in order to be healthy.
Yeah. It's so relatable as a woman, feeling like if there's something I could in theory be doing to improve my body, my appearance, just whatever, then like I should be doing it.
Yeah.
Because like I'm just fundamentally deficient, and like there's always a new thing you can be climbing. And I imagine, I mean, with weightlifting, there's like, you just go up and up and up.
Oh yeah, it just fits right in with that perfectionistic thing. And the other thing is like, you know, CrossFit is a culture. Unfortunately, I was fortunate to have a really good gym that approached things in a healthy way. So if you were a beginner, or if you needed to, you know, only do this part of the workout or modify or scale down, you totally could. It was totally acceptable. And that's not true of every CrossFit gym. So I felt really fortunate to find the gym that I did.
But
love the people there.
You still had the thing that was like, I should still finish the workout even if I might get injured.
Yeah, exactly. And the whole thing about CrossFit is like the CrossFit Games and qualifying for the CrossFit Games. And even though I knew that I would never qualify, every year you're training to get better so that you can qualify, right? And that's kind of the mentality.
Such a business plan.
It really is, right? It was a brilliant business model. And so like even like our little gym would have like the open workout, and you would do the workout, submit your scores, and then if it was good enough, you could move on to the next level. And we would have teams within the gym. And so I would join a team and not want to let my teammates down. And so I would want to push myself as hard as possible. And I did this one crazy workout, and it was very, very hard on my lower back. And my personal trainer will tell you, I don't have lower back problems. I have a bad relationship with my mother. And that's and that's what causes it. And I actually believe a lot in that, because our bodies do store trauma and tension and pain and all those things. And I hurt myself halfway through the workout, and I had to stop. And that was devastating for me, because I was like, I'm letting my team down. And my trainer said, well, why don't you rest and do these 3 or 4 things and then come back tomorrow and see if you feel better. And the tomorrow was like, that's the last day to submit your scores. And so I did rest, and I did like do the things he told me to. And I did come back and I did do the workout. But after it was over, I went, why did I do that to myself? Why did I not just allow myself to be injured and say, I'm 48 years old. I do not need to be competing with 20-year-olds for the kind of weight that they're lifting. Why am I trying to fit myself again into another box that's not healthy for me? I need to do what's healthy for me at my age, for my body, and for my mentality. And that's, I think, the key to a lot of these things, that we think it's about physicality, but it's not. It's about mentality. And what's healthy for you physically has a lot to do with what's healthy for you mentally. And so, yeah, CrossFit is great. I had wonderful muscles. I enjoyed that. I loved it. But it wasn't healthy for me mentally. And so I had to learn how to do things like that in a healthy way, just like everything. That was way on a tangent. Sorry.
I had no idea. It was such like that kind of structure where you're in teams competing and needing to like qualify different levels.
Yeah, it can be intense.
That's real. Yeah, that's very interesting.
I didn't know about the CrossFit Games.
Yeah.
So everyone's just doing it for the friends you make along the way.
Yeah, well, and you can watch them on YouTube. And like when you win the CrossFit Games, you are crowned the world's fittest woman, or the world's fittest man. And one of the women who has won the CrossFit Games several consecutive years, like won the games, had a baby, came back the next year, and only got 3rd place. Isn't that sad? You know, it's like
fall from grace.
The world's fittest woman. You know, it's like
the 3rd fittest woman is so cringe.
Yeah,
so embarrassing.
Yeah.
Well, that was a really good tangent about
everything you say is so wise.
I know. I want to go on every tangent. But I'm curious, like, what else? How else? What are the other things that jump out to you about what was unhealthy in your family system? I know you talked about like the culture of secrecy and like the facade of it all.
Yeah.
Are there any other like things that I don't know, feel important to?
Yeah, I think the culture of secrecy was. I think that was the most toxic, most difficult thing, because when you are keeping each other's secrets, it's not safe to tell the truth. And it means that we value appearance over truth. Mm-hmm. And so now I am completely the opposite, where I value truth over everything else. Because even though the truth is painful and difficult, and you think about the nature of family secrets and the things that people keep as family secrets, and it's like, oh, it's too painful. I don't want my kids to know about this, because if they did, they would be devastated. Well, the problem is they're going to find out about it at some point, and they're going to be then even more devastated that you didn't tell the truth in the first place.
Yep.
And so that's what I found to be the most troubling, was the secrecy of it. And the sort of diffusion of information where nobody has the full story. Some of us know this part and some of us know that part. And it's like, even after Stacy's death, I really wanted to know what was happening in the rest of the family, because not a lot of the family knew that I was actually there. And even now today, I think some of them don't really understand that part of the story. And what I wanted to know was like, what was going on with the rest of you? Like, what were the rest of you told, about what happened? What was the narrative? And nobody will really give me a straight answer about that. And it's just disappointing, because it's like, I personally would rather know the truth than be lied to, but that's obviously not true of everyone.
Mm-hmm. Do you see a connection between, not to say that like every Mormon family or Mormonism is like trying to just consistently churn out Loris and Chads and those types of people, but do you see a connection between Mormonism as an ideology, as a religion, and some of those like harmful patterns or propensities for secrecy?
Yeah, because we obviously all are going to make mistakes, and none of us can live up to the Mormon ideal of perfection. Like that, it's just not physically possible to do that, right? And so Mormonism will tell you, oh, that's why we have repentance, But then, like, when you repent of a thing, if you do it again, then all those sins come back to you. So it's like
it's heavier every time.
Yeah. I think of like Mr. Incredible with the black balls that just like he eventually gets dragged down. So that's what it feels like. It's not safe for you to admit that you have faults and mistakes or things that you're struggling with. Mm-hmm. And that, I think, is the most toxic part of the culture, because then necessarily you have people hiding all of these horrible things. Like, if it's not even safe for me to say I enjoy green tea, then it's also not safe for me to say I have murderous thoughts. I realize that's a huge disparity of spectrum, but it's all the same thing. Like, I'm not safe to tell the things that I'm thinking and feeling or struggling with. And so therefore everybody gets sicker instead of getting help with the issues that they struggle with. Mm-hmm. And we feel like we have to hide the parts of ourselves that are the most toxic, and that makes them even more toxic. So it's like a self-informed cycle that just keeps going and going. And I think that what we're seeing right now is the exposure of a lot of these secrets. We're seeing a lot of Mormon people in the news doing terrible things, abusing people and all this kind of stuff because of a shadow self that they have not yet confronted. And so I feel like that's the biggest issue.
That feels like all we've been talking about on the channel lately.
Yes.
Yeah. And it was interesting what you said about how Lori would get in these situations. I don't know if you're like mainly talking about relationships, but then it wouldn't be quite what she wanted. So then she would come up with the narrative she needed to have to then, move on to the next thing or whatever.
Right.
But that feels like so much a part of that. Like the stuff you repress and don't feel able to just openly pursue in a healthy way. You'll just come up with a warped story that gets you to it.
Yeah. And I think that, like, my mind went to the same place with, like, the tea and the murder is, like, if you, exactly as you said, like, if you can't talk about these normal things that are, like, fine or even good that the church has created this sin around and making you feel guilty for just normal stuff.
Right.
Imagine the other stuff and getting into like needing to hide normal behavior is just such a weird. It
plunges you deeper into a self-contained world that is probably not healthy for any of us to be in, because we're like everything is easier in community.
Mm-hmm. That's true.
It's good to get the feedback, but you don't get like good healthy feedback if you have to pretend in order to maintain standing in your community.
Yeah. And I don't know if you guys had this experience, but I felt like if I was struggling with something, whether it be word of wisdom or law of chastity or whatever crazy rule it was, you sort of feel like you're the only one. Mm-hmm. And it creates this isolation where, again, you're shaming yourself for being different than everybody else. But you don't realize that everybody else is struggling with it, because it is like, and I have to like speak specifically to like the way that we teach about sex and sexuality in the church is so harmful and so wrong. And I was so appreciative of Natasha Parker Helfer, who started saying out loud that masturbation is a completely normative human developmental thing, and we should not be stigmatizing it because everybody does it. Yes. And so if you're quote unquote struggling with it and you feel like you have to confess it to the bishop, I mean, how embarrassing, but not realizing that he does it too, but then you feel like you're the only one. And so you feel like you're bad and wrong. And you feel like when you go to the temple recommend interview and they say, are you worthy? you're like, well, I'm the only one who struggles with this thing, so I'm not going to say that I struggle with it, because if I do, and for me, it was like, the beginning of that was like the youth temple trip. I don't know if you ever went on those things, but it's like, if you're the only one in your youth group that doesn't get a temple recommend, it's such a judgy environment, you know, it's like, what's wrong with you? You know, why couldn't you go? And everybody speculates about what the sin could possibly be, you know? And so it's like, you know, you get into a habit of covering up the things that are shameful or that you don't want to talk about, because the social consequences are so incredibly high. And if that's what it's like as a youth, imagine what it's like as an adult. You know, if you are going to get married in the temple and then all of a sudden the wedding gets called off, you know, and it's that whole thing. And then what if there's a ward temple night, but you don't have a current recommend, and everybody in your relief society is going and you're the only one, and they're like, why didn't you go? You know, it just becomes this thing that just over and over throughout your entire life. It's just so sad.
Yeah, the stakes are constantly being raised.
Yes.
About all the most minute stuff.
Right. And it becomes more and more consequential. The stakes get higher and higher. And then your entire family's eternal salvation is resting on whether or not you masturbate.
Yeah, literally.
It's just like, that's a heavy thing to have to think about.
You introduce death into it, and then it's like, if so-and-so is doing something bad, I'll never be able to see that loved one again. How many people are stuck in that trap of like held hostage, the church is holding their dead relatives hostage?
Yes, exactly. Like, and how many parents feel like this incredible shame if their children leave the church or fall away, quote unquote, you know, because they're like, oh, I should have been a better example, because that's what we're taught by the general authorities. Like, if you're not a good enough example, your kids are going to leave the church, and when they do, you're never going to see them again. You know, it's like, oh, well, you'll make it to the celestial kingdom. You can visit your kids down in celestial. It's fine.
And while you're feeling the weight of the world, godly sorrow for normal bodily processes, you find out that all the founders were marrying children, and that's just kind of like, well, you know, sometimes.
Yeah, but they didn't masturbate.
But I guarantee.
I'm just kidding. Just, it's not in the records, so, you know, we don't know for sure it didn't happen. Nobody wrote it in their diary.
Yeah, exactly, right. They didn't really have conjugal relations. He didn't write about it in a full-length memoir.
It's funny to joke about that, but that's exactly what gets said by apologists all the time. They're like, well, there's no proof that they had sex, and it's like, I'm sorry. That's just not reality.
Yeah, okay.
I mean, it's ridiculous. I can't even talk about it.
But we don't have to go down that route, obviously, but just the disparity of like what they'll swallow from leaders historically, but then all the guilt, and that's when you realize like, oh, this is like an intentionally curated, shame-based, exploitative structure. It's not an accident. Exactly, that this is happening.
Exactly.
It's because this is the system that benefits the institution, that is literally just like sapping people of will and like burying them in guilt.
Yeah, exactly. And thinking about, you know, giving the leaders a pass because they're leaders, and then expecting the membership to, you know, be held to a higher standard than the leaders are. And it's like, I think of my own, like I have a 14-year-old daughter. She's almost 14, my youngest daughter. And I'm like, if some dude came to her and said, I promise your entire family eternal salvation if you'll just marry me, I would be like, please run away.
Get out of there.
You know, and I would probably have a lot of words to say to that individual.
But Mom, he's the Lord's mouthpiece on earth today.
Mom, you're not really getting it.
But that's exactly it. I mean, we put so much store by what these men tell us is important and tell us what we should be thinking and feeling and doing. And we really outsource that critical thinking to them. I even had a family member comment to me when I brought up some things about the SEC scandal. And she was like, well, I just trust that the brethren are called of God and they have to answer to God. So I don't worry about what they do with the money. It's like there's a huge piece missing there that some people just don't connect those dots because it's easier to just trust that they're going to do the right thing. And to have that cognitive dissonance of, well, if they did the wrong thing, see part one, it was the right thing because they did it in the service of the Lord, or however they're going to, you know, frame that. It's just, I think it's sad.
I love that people like you who have gone through really hard things are leading the discussions, because everything you say, I'm like, oh, that's that phenomenon, perfectly encapsulated. Your book has got to just be full of wisdom.
Well, it's funny because it's a very short book, comparatively speaking. It's very small. I had a really hard time letting it go because I wrote it while I was in the process of healing. And so a lot of things that are in the book are not how I still feel. Mm-hmm. It was really hard for me to not continue to edit and rewrite and everything, because there's like a whole chapter on CrossFit that is not how I feel now, and I wanted to keep like revising it because I learned new things. And I just realized at one point that I was like, I love the fact that I'm going to continue to learn new things and change and grow as I get older and more, intelligent, hopefully. And I'm just going to let that be what it was at that time, because the main point in writing it was not for it to be a philosophical discussion of what I feel and believe right now. It was meant to be hope for other survivors, because I think the pervasive thing that I believed when I was going through my healing was like I had this huge long list of traumatic things that I had to process, and I felt like there was no way out. I felt like I was never going to get through it. And I felt like giving up a lot of the time. And I didn't have any examples in my life of people who were speaking about the fact that they had been through seriously traumatic things and still were able to come out on the other side. And I looked at all the statistics of trauma survivors, and it's like the possibility of addictive behavior and suicidal behavior and mental health problems is like exponentially higher for people who have survived trauma. And so those were the models that I had in my group therapy sessions. It was like women who were addicted to substances and women whose lives had kind of been messed up and had been in prison or in and out of jail or whatever and had lost custody of their kids and things like that. Like those were the examples that I had. And I think that the reason why I was able to kind of pull myself out of it is because I did have this mentality that even though what I went through was horrific and hard and horrible, it did teach me a lot of things. And I came out of it with the ability to connect with other people in a way that people who have not been in trauma don't really understand. And so I just wanted I wanted my book to be something that others, like somebody could read it and say, okay, it really is possible for me to go from this to that, even though it feels overwhelming and hard and horrible. So
can we really quick go back to what we were talking about before we started shooting, which was your EMDR experience? Because I feel like you just articulated something so well about that. It was kind of related about how you related differently to therapy and trauma. And can you tell us more about that?
I hope I remember exactly what I said.
I'm sure it'll be
somewhat different. But the whole premise of EMDR therapy, EMDR stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. And it's a process by where you recreate the motion of your eyes during REM sleep, which is like the restorative part of sleep. And you do this while you're thinking about the traumatic memory and how you felt about it. And what it does is it carves a new neural pathway in your brain so that it separates the traumatic experience from the negative emotions that you have that are associated with it. And part of setting up the processing is for you to bring up the original trauma and to identify the negative feeling that you have about yourself related to that trauma. And that was really difficult for me at first because I was like, I don't have any negative feelings about myself. I have negative feelings about my abuser, and it's so easy for us to just foist all of the responsibility onto that party because obviously they did something wrong. And that's something that we hopefully agree with in societies, that abusers do bad things and abuse is bad. But I think the entirety of getting to the place where you do truly love and accept yourself is realizing that it's not the trauma that causes the pain, it's the belief that you have about yourself because of the trauma. It's like, this made me feel, the specific abuse that I went through made me feel like I was helpless. It made me feel like I had no control over anything. It made me feel like I was not worthy of good treatment. And so I adopted all those beliefs about myself. And that's really what caused the negative feelings, which then in turn caused traumatic responses, et cetera. And it just keeps going. So I think the entirety of mental health healing begins with being introspective about our own relationship with ourselves And that's the thing that I talk about more than anything else is like, everybody wants help with their relationships. But if I ask you to name the most relationships in your life, or the most important relationships in your life, how long would it take you before you talk about the relationship with yourself? Because most of us, as being raised Mormon or whatever, will say, well, God obviously is the most important relationship. But I would submit that you cannot have a relationship with a higher power who loves you unconditionally unless you love yourself unconditionally. You cannot accept unconditional love unless you love yourself unconditionally. And so it is with any relationship that we have. We can't accept friendship from someone who loves us for all of our faults unless we also love ourselves for all of our faults. And so I think the beginning of it is being comfortable with being alone, completely alone by yourself, and loving who you are and not needing any other connection in order to feel whole and complete, but knowing that you have everything inside of you that you need to be whole and complete, and not constantly reaching out for external validation.
So perfectly said. So you started therapy at 35, but you were telling us before we started filming that you were kind of going to church for a long time, but you weren't really fully invested, so to speak.
Yeah, so I resigned in February, and that was like a firm break for me. Before that, I felt like I was really trying to fit myself into an impossible thing. I was never going to be totally acceptable in Mormonism. And so when the November 15th exclusion policy came out, November 2015, I don't know what date it was, but that was a huge problem for me because I really, I had so many students at the time that I was also a teacher. I had so many students that were LGBTQ and that I loved and supported. And I had 2 sons that came out, although it was much later than that. I just could not imagine that the God that I believed in was going to leave people out. I understand the concept of needing to purify yourself to be in the presence of deity. I understood that intellectually. But what I didn't understand was, how can God exclude somebody because of the way he made them? That didn't make any sense to me at all. And so that was a huge separation for me. It was really it wasn't, I can't even say it was a shelf item because it was not something I could just put away and ignore. It was like, I can't be a part of this anymore. And I started to think about where did we get things so wrong? And I always had believed that the Brethren got it wrong about excluding Black people from priesthood blessings and temple blessings. And so I started to sort of wrestle with that and think, well, if they got that wrong, they're probably getting this wrong now. But how many hundreds of years is it going to take before they, start to get it right? It was just the beginning of a little bit of unraveling for me. Because at the time, I was still teaching gospel doctrine and fulfilling my callings and bringing my kids to church, and my daughter was on a mission. And it was really hard to wrestle with all that stuff. So it really wasn't until 2020 when COVID hit that was so miraculous that I could stop going to church because, perfectionistic me was every single Sunday, no matter what. Yeah. And if you're sick, you listen to conference talks or you study the scriptures or something, even if you can't keep your eyes open. But it was a way for me to step away from the church and sort of examine it from the outside and think, as I had done with everything else in my life up to that point, if I was choosing a religion for myself today, would I choose this? I was absolutely not. And then I started thinking about how I never had a choice. And I hate this trend of my son is choosing to be baptized. Right. Because by the time we turn 8 years old, for those of us who were born into the church, if you think about starting primary at the age of 3 in earnest, even though the nursery has lessons and songs and whatever, but really if you think about 3-year-olds are starting to be taught what the Holy Ghost is, what God is, what Jesus is. And you think about going to church for 3 hours, you think about family prayer, family scripture study, family home evening, ward activities, general conference, all of these things, from the time that you're 3 years old to the time that you're 8 years old, you have endured over 1,000 hours of indoctrination. And at that point in your development, in your childhood development, you're not capable of making a decision that differentiates you from your caregivers because you are hardwired to depend on them, not only for connection, but for your sense of self. Like our sense of who we are gets formed by our caretakers in those very early years, like before we're age 6, really. And so if everybody in your entire family and all of your friends and like your extended family and everything have chosen this thing, what's the likelihood that an 8-year-old is going to choose something different?
Yeah.
It's like, well, let me examine the facts from both sides, and then I'll get back to you.
Yeah, and when the bishop gives you that like 8-year-old interview, because I sat through those interviews with my own children, you know, it's like your mom is here and your bishop is there, the person who holds all of the authority, who is your judge in Israel, literally, you know, and how are you supposed to answer those questions as a child? You know, it really is. I used to think, oh, it's so great that we don't baptize kids till they're 8 because they have this choice, you know.
Yeah, but then babies.
Yeah, exactly. But then as an adult, I was like, wait a second, my 8-year-olds aren't old enough to make a choice like this. Like
they still believe in Santa Claus.
That's exactly it. And we teach our kids about Santa Claus. And then we like spring it on them that he's not real. And look how devastated they are. And yet we give them this mythical way of believing about a man in the sky and expect them to have a different response. Mm-hmm. You know, and it's like this cognitive dissonance as a parent. Well, it's like Santa Claus is not real. There's no way he could get to all those houses in one night. But Jesus Christ, his atonement can cover every living human being. Mm-hmm. And it's like, I mean, I think that our journey to the divine and our journey to that something higher than ourselves has to be as unique as we each as individuals are. Mm-hmm. There's no way to homogenize it into one thing that fits everybody. Even within one family, even within one genetic system, you just can't do it. It's just impossible.
Because it is ultimately an exploration of the self that does require that like compassionate evaluation of just like, what am I working with? What am I going to, the honesty that it takes to just have a look and not push it to the shadow and pretend on the outside that you're this perfect, you know, whatever.
And not judge it. Yeah. You know, to look and examine at all of the parts of yourself dispassionately and say, like, these are all the parts of myself for better or for worse. And there are parts that are good and parts that are bad, but really it's not good and bad because there's no moral assignation to that. It's just what is. Yeah. You know, we're the only ones that assign that value system to the parts of ourselves. And that's another thing that I learned in therapy. I love the book, The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk. Have you guys read that one? Amazing. And he talks about all these different modalities of treating trauma. And one of the things I loved the most was the internal family systems. Mm-hmm. Do you guys remember him talking about that? So it's like, I have a part of myself that is a warrior, and it comes out when I feel threatened. And I also have a part of myself that is a lover, and it comes out when I want to connect with somebody. But if my warrior comes out when I'm trying to connect with somebody, I have to say, hello, warrior. Thank you for showing up today. I appreciate you trying to protect me because it shows me what's important to me. But right now I need you to step back because this is the one I want to focus on at the moment. It's not telling the warrior, you're bad, you're horrible, you're terrible. Why did you show up right now? Yeah, we need to just banish you to the shadow. You can't show up anymore because we do need every part of ourselves to be a whole functioning human being. So we have to love and accept all of the parts of ourselves without judgment.
Amen.
Everything you're saying is so self-core, but said in the best way.
Have you back possible. On the Claymation Mental Health podcast
oh my gosh.
we're doing.
That sounds amazing. I love Claymation. I think that's going to be awesome. I can't wait.
Just a random question I have. Why do you think Mormonism came, or like kind of fully shedding Mormonism came so late for you relative to all the other work you did?
Or did that prepare you to kind of see that? Sorry to jump on.
Did which prepare me for what?
Like, did the therapy and you know, learning all these things allow you to see Mormonism through those filters?
Absolutely yes to that. To that, yeah, absolutely yes. And I think it came so late because when I started going to therapy, I was really going because I wanted to repair my relationship with my parents, which is wild when you consider that I was abused as a child, and I had a horribly toxic family system and a coercive marriage. Like, that was the thing that I focused on in therapy because that was what was hurtful to my parents, that I was having panic attacks every time I had to go over there for dinner. And after we would see each other, I'd be in bed for 3 days crying, and I didn't know why. And so I was like, okay, I have to fix this somehow. So I went trying to repair my relationship with my parents. And what ended up coming up over and over, when my therapist showed me this little wheel, and I don't know if you've seen it, but it's like this wheel that describes all the different kinds of abuse. There's like financial abuse, emotional abuse, sexual abuse, physical abuse, like all in this little wheel. And it gives little descriptors that are common to each kind and little descriptors that are different for each kind. And I remember looking at that and thinking, oh my gosh, I can't believe that I'm in an abusive relationship. It was like shocking to me. And at the same time was shocking to no one else. After, when I started telling people that I was getting divorced, they were like, yep, saw it coming. You know, I was like, what?
Why don't you tell me?
Why didn't you say something? But you can't say something to somebody. I mean, you can. There are things that you can say that are helpful. Like, I'm concerned about your health in this situation. I'm concerned that you don't have a voice in your relationship. Things like that are helpful to say. But it wouldn't have been helpful for somebody to come to me and say, you're in an abusive relationship. I would have been like, no, I'm not. I mean, he's kind of weird sometimes, but but we minimize, So I think that the first thing was my parental relationship. The next thing was my marriage. And the next thing was the trauma. It was almost like I went backwards. And throughout all of that, the one stability that I had was my faith. And so I relied so much on prayer and meditation and like a connection outside of myself that I don't think it would have been possible for me to deconstruct religion at that point. And I also wasn't awake enough, which is the answer to your question. Like, I didn't realize how abusive and toxic the culture of the church was. Like, I knew there were problems with it, but I was like, oh, but it's true. So if it's true, then we just try to fix these problems, and it's just because people are unhealthy. Totally, So I rationalized and explained and all that kind of stuff. And also I was very much like a rule follower within the gospel. Like, ask my parents, I was totally rebellious, right? But I was rebellious in the way that I wanted to be myself but wasn't allowed to. But within the gospel, I wanted to check the boxes. And so I never read a single uncorrelated material until probably 3 years ago.
Wow.
And I'm 49. So it took me that long to break that mental spell or whatever it was that I was under, that I was programmed with as a child, that, you only read the official things because the unofficial things are all bad.
Well, it's amazing to see sort of an invert of our process and some other people's, where it's like the rug gets pulled out underneath, the shelf breaks, and then you're just scrambling to make sense and having to then learn the language and do the work. Where it sounds like you had all that going in, so you're leaving like fully equipped to understand and analyze, which is really interesting.
Yeah, it's really funny because I have listened to a lot of other people's transition and deconstruction stories, and I was like, I kind of was a pro at deconstruction by the time I got there, because I had already deconstructed my childhood, my family system, my marriage, my career. I had deconstructed all of these things already. So when I got to deconstructing Mormonism, it was incredibly painful and hard. And I went through every part of the grief cycle, and I still have waves of it. Especially with like struggling with the time that was lost and the way I could have been living my life the whole rest of the time and all of that. But by the time, that's why it was such a fast thing from like being sort of out of it and recognizing some of the unhealthy things about the culture and then still believing it was true. But then once I started digging into really like reading documented history and connecting with reality of the history, it was a very fast process. It was like I think I found Shannon Caldwell Montez's thesis on the secret Mormon meetings of 1922 on like February 10th.
I'm intrigued.
Oh, it was amazing, because going down this path of like, when did the brethren get it wrong with regard to the race and the priesthood? When I was teaching gospel doctrine, I distinctly remember that Joseph Smith ordained black men to the priesthood. And I distinctly remember that the women were admonished because they weren't using their priesthood enough. And so I was like, when did this happen? why was it that we strayed away from that? And I came to the conclusion that was Brigham Young. Like, he was a horrible person. He obviously had this value system where he didn't value black people. He didn't value women. And so, like, he imposed his own societal needs and wants onto the religion, and that's where we are today. But I wanted to know exactly when it went wrong. So I started digging into that period of history. And I came across it because B.H. Roberts was a faithful Mormon historian. And he presented the entirety of the 15 with 140 pages of problems with the historicity of the Book of Mormon.
Yeah.
And their response was to stand up and bear their testimony and say, I believe it's true. I know there's probably these problems. We'll deal with that later. The point is, it's true. You know, and he didn't get the response he wanted. So then he went out into the intellectual population of Salt Lake City and gathered his own little fireside together and said, these are huge problems. What should we do about this? And there were some people, to be fair, in that meeting who were like, yeah, that is a big problem. How do we talk about this and still maintain everything we believe and all of that kind of stuff? But nobody did anything about it. And then the brethren sent him on a mission.
Classic.
And so his stuff got buried. It resurfaced a little bit, I think, around the 60s or so, something like that. But for the most part, it was just totally ignored. And what Shannon Caldwell Montez did for her thesis was she detailed all of the journal writings from all of the people who attended those meetings. Wow. And she talked about, you know, what the problems were with the historicity, obviously. And I read some other things that were like basic Bible scholarship will tell you that the version of the King James Bible that Joseph Smith quotes in the Book of Mormon did not exist in 600 BC. So that fact alone has to deconstruct the entire idea that it was a divine document, because he was using a version of the Bible that couldn't have existed then. And if you ask people who are apologists, a lot of them will say, well, it's because God's word is the same and it never changes. But the point is, the King James Version was a version of God's word. It wasn't like, it's not like it was the pure, you know, because it's definitely not the only one. And then I sort of started thinking about it. I was like, you know what? This is really dumb. We base our entire lives off of a historical document that was written by an incredibly small population of people in an infinitesimally small geographical location in the world. And if you think about all of the other ideas of deity that exist out there in the world, it's like, why did we glom onto this one? Well, it's because that one survived.
That one was forced.
It was a written thing that survived, and it was like, people, you know, King James obviously paid people to make a transcription that fit with what he wanted and everything. And so when you think about things globally and universally and expand your mind in that way, it's like ridiculous to think that we believe this little thing about this little tiny population. And so I deconstructed so fast after that. I think I found that essay on February 10th, and I went through that entire thought process. I probably stayed up for 2 days straight reading everything I could read, and just like voraciously consuming all of this. Like, finally, it's the real history, and this makes a lot more sense than that does. You know, like the narrative that I was fed that I believe, you have to do so many mental gymnastics to twist yourself into that, but this makes perfect sense. And so February 14th, I resigned.
Wow.
So it took about 4 days for that to happen.
Intense 4 days, I'm sure.
It was a really intense 4 days, and I actually had to call into work. Yeah. You know, and the thing is, like,
been there.
My boss, he knows a lot about like a lot of my history, because he actually is the parent of some of my former students. And so we knew each other, we're friends and that kind of stuff. So he knew I was Mormon and that I was going through some transition difficulties, and he knew about trauma, and he knew about Lori and all this stuff. So I just called him and I said, look, I just can't come in today. I said, I'm just going through this deconstruction about the church. And he was like, well, I thought, you kind of have been really out of like, you haven't been going to church and you haven't been really practicing Mormonism for a while. And I was like, yeah, but it's one thing to suspect it. It's another thing entirely to know it. And now that I know it, I have this grief that I need to process, and I can't come in today because that's more important.
Good for you.
It really is.
I was just like, I'm gonna go.
And then I hung up and cried myself forever. So yeah.
I was curious, changing directions a little bit. What were your first initial impressions of Chad and his getting together with Lori?
Did you get to meet him?
I didn't. I never met him. I didn't know anything about him at all until. Yeah, I was very distanced from the family. So I knew that Lori was attending the temple regularly. Like in 2018, I remember her mom making an Instagram post that she was going every day. And I thought that was very odd. And I was like, why in the world would she be going to the temple every day? Because even at my height of like super striving, I was going once a week.
Yeah, that would be brutal every day.
I can't even imagine.
The
I really can't.
as well.
Yeah, I can't even imagine. Like thinking about the temple ceremony just gives me the shudders anyway. But thinking about going every single day, I couldn't do it. So I thought that was very odd, and especially for who Lori was. Like she lived the gospel on her own terms. Like she fit everything into a way that she wanted to do it. And I remember her even saying to me at one point, like, we don't need garments. All we need is just like a little bra and panties with the right markings. So that was kind of her attitude about things. She wanted it to be the way she wanted it to be. So if there's something she didn't like, she didn't do it, kind of thing. So it was very odd to me that she was going every single day. But again, she wasn't on social media, or at least I wasn't connected with her. So I wasn't seeing posts of hers. I was only seeing what her family was posting. And so I didn't really know that things were taking a dysfunctional turn. And I actually was getting ready to go visit my daughter in Rexburg in the summer of 2019 when all of this came down. And I contacted Summer because she and I were in touch on social media. And I was like, hey, I'm driving up to Rexburg. Is it okay if we stay with you on our way up there?
Wait, sorry, Summer is
Lori's younger sister.
Okay.
And so at this time, Janice and Barry and Summer and Lori were all living in the same area. Alex at the time was an over-the-road trucker, so I didn't really know where he was living, but I didn't think he was living like close to them, but it was not. Alex,
Lori's brother.
Yeah, Lori's older brother.
This is post Stacy's death, right?
Right.
How many
So Stacy died in 1998.
Oh, okay. I wasn't piecing that timeline together very well then. Okay, so that is just something you lived with for a really long time.
Yeah. Yeah, and sadly did not put together any of the pieces until after the kids went missing.
And a little background, just like really quick, because
we've
already just for people who aren't super familiar with the story. Alex.
So Alex is Lori's older brother, and he and Lori and Chad were sort of like all together in this. And Alex is the one that is suspected of actually performing the killings, allegedly, although we don't know for sure. Lori has already been convicted of murder. Chad is about to stand trial for murder. And then Lori's actually getting ready to go back to Arizona to stand trial for the murder of Charles Vallow, who was her fourth husband. Wow. It's hard to keep track of. Chad's her fifth husband. And
you kind of suspect, or I feel like a lot of people suspect, that Alex performed a mercy killing of Stacy.
That's my theory. Now applying the knowledge of these events to that situation and how things happened. It, like, when I think of that story in the context of how everything happened, it appears to me that I was being used as an alibi so that Alex would not find Stacy alone. And the rest of the family was in Hawaii, and I believe that they used that as an opportunity to do a mercy killing because they had talked about it for a long time. Stacy was unwell for a long time. Barry and Janice had frequently said, like, maybe it's just your time to go. Stacy was also very depressed about, her health was bad. Her daughter had been kind of taken away and estranged from her. And that's Melanie Boudreau, for those of you who don't know. And so I think she was in a sad place, but at the same time, why as her family member would you not try to get her some kind of help? Yeah. Rather than just telling her to give up,
Especially the piece of Alex going and buying golf clubs and
yes.
Well, I don't know. It seems a bit unlikely that he just happened to be worried about her that night, but then when she's actually in the hospice for days, he's not showing up.
Right. So for those of you who don't know the story, we found Stacy unconscious. She was determined to be in a diabetic coma, and they moved her to hospice care pretty quickly because they realized she was not going to survive. And Alex disappeared at this point and didn't show up until a couple of days later. And he told me that he had like been shopping and he'd purchased all these things, and among them golf clubs and decorations for his apartment and new comforter and stuff like that. And he told me that he had used Stacy's credit cards and basically had said like, she's not going to care, and that nobody's ever going to have to pay for it, so it doesn't matter. So that just shows obviously the lack of emotional connection to any of it, you know.
Her parents not flying back from Hawaii.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the entire family was in Hawaii with the exception of Adam and Alex. Adam is Alex's younger brother, and Adam was away. He was working in another state. And so Alex was the only one who was in San Antonio at the time. And we, you know, talked occasionally, but not that often. But his contacting me was sort of out of the blue. The circumstances were very suspicious. But again, I was in the ether of the family system, just accepting everything that was told to me and rationalizing away anything that I thought was amiss, because that was what was expected of me playing my role in the family system. And so, you know, when all of these other things occurred, surrounding Stacy's death, like they told us that she was going to be buried, but then she was actually cremated. They told us she was buried in one place and she actually ended up being buried some other place. It was just, there was a huge number of weird, crazy circumstances that nobody can explain except for probably Janice and Barry, because they're the only ones who have like all the information. So I feel like if they were willing to talk about things, then we could probably get a lot of answers, but I don't think they ever will, because it makes them look really bad and possibly complicit.
Yeah.
So.
Or even the authors of the plan, maybe.
Yeah, exactly. So kind of going back to when this all started with Lori and the Chad Daybell stuff and everything, I was on my way up to Rexburg. I contacted Summer to ask if I could stay with them. She said yes, we'd love to have you. I was kind of excited to see those family members again because I hadn't seen them in a long time. Wanted my kids to see them and everything. And then it just like contact stopped. And I was like, that's very weird. But I was like, you know what? It's not that unusual for this family to just like ghost people or whatever if something comes up. So I texted her again and I was like, hey, look, if plans have changed, that's totally fine. I can stay somewhere else, but I still would like to see you guys, you know, at least, you know, stop by or something. And got no response whatsoever. So I stayed with a different friend in Arizona and then ended up going up to Rexburg. And 2 days later, I got a phone call from Adam's then wife who told me that Charles had been shot. And she told me the circumstances of how it happened. And like immediately, absolutely, I was like, that was not an accident. It was not self-defense. That was totally premeditated. And it's totally on brand because Lori's last husband, she had accused him of SA, and then Alex tased him. And the family story was that the plan was to tase him, throw him in the trunk, and take him out in the desert somewhere. Super dark, right? But as a family, we were like, oh, Alex, he's just overreacting, and he tased Joe, and that's terrible, and he's going to serve his time, and that'll be it. You know, it was just kind of this casual sort of thing that just happened. Like, people go to jail. It just happens. And, you know, like, Alex has always been a little out there. And so it was not super out of the ordinary for him to go to jail for doing something stupid, which is sad, right? I mean, you would think that'd be a red flag for everybody. But I now think probably that Summer got wind of me coming into town, knew that Adam was coming into town for this intervention with Lori because she'd been acting crazy and her husband was trying to get her help. He was trying to get her temple recommend taken away because he thought that would snap her out of this crazy behavior where she was claiming that he was possessed by a demon and she was claiming that he wasn't the same person, and she had said that she could kill him and that she would have an angel take away his body. So Charles was desperately reaching out to people, telling them, this is not right, something terrible is happening, she's gone off the deep end. It wasn't until much later that I heard the story of her sort of abandoning Charles and JJ for several months while she went to Hawaii with Tylee, and then found out that that's when she was meeting with Chad. So by the time she got to that point, she already had been deep into reading Visions of Glory. She already had been deep into healing energy work, you know, sort of this idea of multiple probations, life after death, near end times kind of thing. So she was already kind of there already. Then she started going to these conferences. And the thing is, like, I really wish the church would just denounce all the conferences and just say those are illegal. You can't do those anymore. Because people would get these ideas about how the church is not mainstream enough and not fundamental enough. And so they would say, let's have this conference. We'll have all these speakers that talk on all these different subjects about, like, being prepared for the end times and having dreams and visions and learning to connect with your dreams and visions and all that kind of stuff. And it just ends up being like this super toxic spiral of people who are practicing unhealthy things. So that's when she met Chad. And obviously was totally drawn to him because she loved visions of glory, and Chad was claiming to have had near-death experiences. He was claiming that the near-death experiences gave him special connection with the other side because his veil was ripped. And so, of course, that would be attractive to Lori because that's proximity to power, you know?
And she took on a similar story, right? That was not known beforehand, but during her witness statement, she was like, Jesus came to me, and ever since then I've seen
the
visions.
retroactive near-death experience.
Yep.
Story?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. Totally. And this is a question I may never be able to answer, but whatever it is about people who have said that they've had a near-death experience, whatever it is about the general population assigning some sort of authority or, you know, special status to those people, it's like, I've had dreams and visions too, but they're not necessarily about the end times, so that makes me less special, you know? Right. And I also recognize that they're probably just my subconscious trying to work out things in my daily life and not something I should necessarily pattern my life after, you know? And it's like, it's wild to me that people just need something like that to hold on to.
Well, and when you're taught that, like, you are the one true church, and we're a church of miracles and angels, and we have all the things that the rest of Christianity doesn't have anymore, but it never happens. Like, members are so starved for, like, the littlest thing, so they get an NDE story. And I've read, I don't know, probably hundreds of NDE stories, and they're all different. Like, there are some, like, common elements or archetypes here and there, especially, like, culture to culture. Yeah. But they're all subjective in the same way that, like, a dream is. And I don't walk around being like, because I had a dream, like you were saying, that therefore I get special status. But in these cultures that are, like, so toxic and amplifying these, like, really egoistic models for behavior and interaction, where it's like, ooh, I have a special spiritual gift, and now people who will buy my book, and not that selling or buying a book is wrong, but, like, you can see how these types are, like, can totally just plug into this whole, like, status game. Yeah, totally. Based on the, like, worst interpretations of just bunk material of, like, racist pseudepigrapha instead of that's like, you should sacrifice your children for God, and it's like, yeah, of course you're gonna get, like, bad people who are gonna use that for bad ends.
Yeah, and I think it's very telling that Chad, you know, he started writing books around 2012, and they were unsuccessful because they were awful garbage books. But when he's published Julie Rowe's story, Julie Rowe had claimed to have a near-death experience, and Chad saw her book selling successfully and saw that she was being asked to speak in engagements, and she was getting all kinds of attention and some sort of pseudo-authority. And he was like, oh, well, in that case, the experiences that I had actually were near-death experiences. I didn't realize how close. I just didn't say that before. And it's so funny, like, reading about his one experience, or hearing even about his one experience where he jumped off a really high cliff and he felt like his body went further down than his spirit went. I was like, yeah, dude, that's what happens when you hit the water going that fast from that high. Like, it feels like you're being jolted out of your body because it's like hitting a brick wall. So that's not a near-death experience. It's just gravity and physics. Those two things together. But yeah, I think that's what Lori was attracted to, was like, he had a special sort of status because he had said he'd had a near-death experience and that his veil was ripped. He claimed to have, like, special insight into the world or whatever, which was also, by the way, fed by Tom Harrison, who was the one who wrote Visions of Glory.
Who you're doing an episode about tomorrow on Mormon Stories?
Yes, and it's just, I can't talk too much about it because I don't want to give a lot away, But the fact is that Visions of Glory was such a popular book among this group of people who were having all of these outside conferences, and it ends up tying into all of these dysfunctional people that we've seen come out in the news recently. So it
Tim
is going
Ballard,
to be
Julie Rowe,
Julie Rowe, Tim Ballard, Jody Hildebrand. Maurice Harker, if you knew about him, was another therapist who said his patients were demonically possessed, and he got arrested for physically beating one of these patients. It's like bizarre to me how it's all connected, and it's like it's going to be mind-blowing, honestly. The first episode is going to be about the book specifically, and the second episode is going to be like how it's all connected. And I think people's eyes are going to be really opened by that. And the harmful thing I think that's shocked me the most is that people will come out and defend the book, even though Lori used it like as a Bible and she quoted from it, and that's where they got a lot of their past probations and dark spirits and all those kinds of things came from the actual book. There are still people who will defend it and say, well, Lori and Chad were crazy, but the book was really good. Like if
they
you
had an emotional experience. It's like with the Tim Ballard stuff coming out, people saw Sound of Freedom, had such a powerful emotional reaction, so they're like, I couldn't begin to separate that. Like that obviously must have been real.
Especially for the story that is so ethno and egocentric, like places us at the heart of everything. And you know, we're already members of the One True Church, but now we have this super special gnosis about how it's all playing out. It's like the super VIP.
Points I just came into.
No way.
Yeah, and Visions of Glory confirms everything that we believe or that Mormons believe about the end times and the afterlife. And so it's like, I think we are conditioned to crave confirmation bias in the church because the church literally teaches us, if you want to know something from God, study it out in your mind first, come up with your own answer, and then ask God if it's right. So you're literally asking God for confirmation bias to confirm your confirmation bias. It's like this crazy loop that doesn't even make any sense. And so I think as members, we're conditioned to seek out more things that confirm what we already believe. And also because there is so much information to disprove it, that we as members sort of feel attacked when facts come out. And so then we search for other non-facts to prove the truth that we already believe.
I will delve deeper into the crevasse of delusion.
Yeah, exactly. So we've read the book, so you don't have to. We're gonna be playing clips from the book and then sort of analyzing why it's so harmful. So it's gonna be a good couple
that will
episodes.
already be out by the time this is up. So that's exciting.
Yeah. Cool. Go check it out.
It's scary imagining people from cultures that tell them to repress so many parts of themselves, then finding schools of thought that are teaching them or encouraging them to assign more meaning to their subconsciouses.
It's
whatever
like
it's spewing up.
Not just ideas, not just bodily impulses. You've got like demons that are pulling the strings, or angels, and it's constantly
and it's
this
also
battle.
literal because it's like I like to see what my subconscious has got going on. There's like wisdom to be gleaned from that, but you have to like come at it, rationally. I suppose. Or, you can't take anything too seriously.
Yeah, and thinking about like the emotional connection you were talking about that people had with Sound of Freedom, but they openly came out and said that it wasn't real, that it was like a dramatized version of the actual events. And the real story is so different and also made up, and so it's like
a dramatized version of a fictitious story.
Exactly. It's like somebody making a Book of Mormon movie. But actually this time Laban kills Nephi, it's like
full simulacrum. It's just not based on anything.
And it's very frustrating to talk to people about the whole Tim Ballard thing because it used to be before Tim Ballard that we as an entire human race could agree that human trafficking was bad. And I think Tim Ballard used his sort of a position, influence, authority, whatever you want to call it, to polarize the issue of human trafficking and to make people believe that it was something that it wasn't. And so we get this narrative that really was stolen from the movie Taken, where somebody
Taken from Taken.
Right, where somebody gets kidnapped and then sold into slavery, and that's really less than 3% of the actual cases. And in my case personally, I was trafficked, but I slept in my bed every night, and I went to school, and I went to church, and I played soccer, and I had friends, and none of the adults in my life knew that it was happening. And it was a babysitter So it's like, it's so close to home, and it's right here. It's happening in our ward buildings, in our stake buildings. It's happening in our church congregations. It's happening in our schools. It's happening in gymnastics with the Larry Nassar case. Like, all of these problems, like the majority of trafficking happens like right under our noses. But Tim Ballard took it to make us believe that it was somewhere else, because that feels safer for us as a humanity to think like, oh, it couldn't possibly happen. And I've posted a lot on my social media about my experience and my healing from it. And I will literally get comments from people telling me that I was not trafficked, and telling me that, like, I must be a pedophile if I disagree with Tim Ballard. You know, it's like, as a trafficking survivor, I'm offended by the narrative that that's the only way it can happen. And for people to not admit that it can happen more than one way is so closed-minded and silly. And it also takes attention away from the more prevalent problem. And it's really hard for me to think about a world in which I can say that I'm against human trafficking and somebody tell me that that's a bad thing to say. You know, it's just wild to me. I don't understand this world that we live in.
And that's why, like, well, we don't have to go any more into analyzing Tim Ballard's personality profile. That's another psychopath, one more degree removed from this conversation. But it is interesting how to see how, especially like with that book, how it all funnels out, and how these types of people are simultaneously like elevated by the system that they are preying on. It's just wacky.
And it's so LDS people always want to well, I mean, they don't accept the truth necessarily with Tim Ballard, but you know, they want to create this distance between Mormonism and people like Chad Daybell and Lori Vallow, but it's
just
like
a few rotten apples.
It's the same like false ideas about the psyche and reality that are driving all of it. And just because there's always going to be a percentage of people that are more extreme in it, but it's like you can find a scriptural version of that anywhere, and like to think that doesn't have an impact just because most of the people you know are, you know, not murderers and wouldn't take it to that extreme, I think is just naive.
Yeah, and I think that it's perpetuated by this idea that it's so difficult to confront our own shame, and the church refusing to say that any of these people have anything to do with the church, and Elder Ballard distancing himself from Tim Ballard is really this refusal to confront our own shame about our own system. It's like the church can't confront that it's affiliated with these people, or that it's associated with these people, or the worst, that they made these people out of their culture, because they can't confront the fact that it means there's something that they need to fix within themselves. It's the same thing in my family system with the situation with Lori, where nobody wants to believe that they contributed to those horrific events. But all of us in the family system have to take a look and say, where was I complicit? What could I have done differently to stop the perpetuation of covering up and not holding accountable and all of that kind of stuff? What could have prevented this? And it obviously, it's not right for me to go and say like, oh, I should have done more. I should have, sacrificed more. I should have known more. I should have whatever. But it is important for me to say, this is the role that I played in the family.
Yeah.
And I could have, if I would have known better, I could have done X instead of what I did. And it may have at least helped the family to be more healthy than it was. And for me to say, I'm not going to continue to contribute to the family in that way. And it's not to say, and I think this is what people are afraid of, like, you're saying I'm responsible for those murders? No, that's not what we're saying. We're saying that you played a part in the family, and that whatever that part was, maybe there was something about it that was dysfunctional or unhealthy that helped contribute to leading to this. Lori did have her own agenda and her own choices, and ultimately she and Chad and Alex are responsible, but they don't exist in a vacuum. They all came from a family who nurtured certain traits in them, and that's how we end up where we are.
I don't think people a lot of people in high control groups like Mormonism, they don't realize that you can take that inventory with full empathy for yourself being a product of that system, because I feel like groups like Mormonism are so like black and white, good or bad. If you were responsible in this way, then that means you're bad. It's like they can't conceptualize I don't know, sort of like reckoning with participation in fucked up systems, like with compassion for yourself.
Yeah, it's all mingled with guilt, like when Richard G. Scott talking like you have to acknowledge, but it wasn't like it wasn't in the way that you just described, which is just a compassionate and like realist, just like let's just get it out there and learn, and then it won't happen again because we will have learned from it. But the way that it's framed is like you need to recognize that you have some repenting too, that you actually are at fault for everything.
Yeah,
it's back to that same thing of like how damaging it is to think that you're a good person. What podcast on the 10% Happier podcast this week? They were saying it's kind of good to think of yourself as like a good-ish person, because then you always have that space to, you know, did I do anything wrong that I should reckon with? But yeah, if you're so in Mormonism, it's like you're either good or you're bad. So I can't have any more data on this side because I've already got all my masturbation shame. So it's really piling up.
Yeah, that's so true.
So you're in Rexburg, but you didn't see any of your family on that trip. So just trying to bring us back to all of this unfolding in your life.
Yeah, so I saw my daughter in Rexburg. You know, we hung out. It was great. I didn't realize until after I got home that Charles had been killed, and then we sort of processed through that. And I didn't find out that the children were missing until I saw it on a social media post. And I can't remember which family member that it was that posted it, but when I saw that the kids were missing, there was no way for me to like wrap my brain around that. I just didn't know what was going on. And I had this one family member that was giving me information, but I realized that she was kind of biased in one direction. So I knew I wasn't getting the whole story. And so I was just kind of taking things in as I found them out and sort of adjusting, you know, as I found them out. So it's like every day something new would come out, and I'm like, oh my gosh, how do I process this? And then the next day something new. So I was getting all the information that came out later in the media, not till after the children were found, and some of it not till the trial, were things that I already knew because family members were telling me things. So the kids went missing, and then I found out that Lori had purchased wedding rings on the Amazon account, and found out that she had purchased wedding clothes, and then found out that she was in, I remember when everybody was looking for Lori and Chad, like nobody knew where they were, and they were looking for tips and information. And I was like, have you tried Hawaii? Because like that was a family pattern. Like we go to Hawaii when things are bad or whatever. And, you know, Lori had lived there at one point. And I was like, obviously, that's where she is. Like, you know, I called the FBI and I was like, hello. I'm pretty sure they already knew by that point, but I couldn't do nothing. I had to be like, I don't have a lot of information, but what I do know, I feel like I have to say. And I also, after the children went missing, started to put together what happened with Stacy and Alex. And I called the FBI again, and I was like, look, I'm really concerned because this happened. I don't think it was an accident. I'm concerned about like the welfare of the children. And I think the time that I realized for sure that they were not going to be found is when I found out that JJ's service dog had been sold. And I knew that, you know, as a child with autism, that his service dog like performed a critical role in his life. Like he needed that dog for stability and safety and everything like that. And I understand actually that she sold the dog and then they moved to Rexburg. So he was alive for some time after she sold the dog. But when I heard that, coupled with the fact that I was hearing about the storage locker that had the children's belongings in it, and you know, that nobody had heard from them. And I was thinking of my own 16-year-old daughter at the time, thinking like, there's no way that I could convince her to go hide in a bunker because I was concerned about a family member kidnapping her. You know, like that's not how we would have handled that. And I can't imagine a 16-year-old kid being there without their phone and not communicating with anybody. It's just not, it wasn't realistic to me. So I think I processed the death of the children late in November or early December, trying to think of timeline, because the kids went missing, and then Lori went to Hawaii and got married, and then Alex turned up dead. Or no, actually they exhumed Tammy. Tammy was dead, and then they exhumed Tammy, and then Alex was dead the next day. So no matter what anybody says, I realized that there was an autopsy done and it was pulmonary embolism. I accept that as a medical diagnosis, but I can't accept that it was accidental. It's just, there's just too much between the blessing that Chad gave him and the timing of the death and the circumstances with Zulema and everything like that. So I heard that Alex had died, and then I was like weirded out by the fact of like, are we going to have a family funeral of some kind? Am I going to have to show up for this thing? But I didn't, because nobody ever told us about any kind of a service. We found out about it like much later, and then found out that Janice's comment was that she only invited people who didn't believe he was a murderer. And so that was a small group of people. And I was like, that should really be kind of telling. Yeah. I was like, can you not now confront the possibility that the children are dead, you know? And still nobody had. And I think it was maybe even after that Janice and Summer went on TV and said that they thought Lori would never hurt the children. But come on, they showed up in Hawaii with no children, telling the people they were renting the condos from that they had no children. So, I mean, it's like, you know, I think there was probably a lot going on with law enforcement behind the scenes that we didn't know about, of course. I think they knew a lot more than we did, a lot sooner than we did. And they were trying to collect evidence and build a case and do everything in the proper way so that she could eventually be convicted. But that was a really, really tough time, the not knowing of, you know, sort of wondering and
seeing all these family members like dropping like flies, kind of. I think you talked in your Women's Stories interview about, didn't you tell your daughter to make sure you don't like have any contact with anyone?
Yeah, when I heard that Lori had moved to Rexburg, and what I was being told about Chad and his beliefs about, you know, demonic spirits, and what Lori had been saying about Charles, saying that he'd been possessed with a demonic spirit, and that Chad had a list of our family members and had labeled them light or dark. I called my daughter and I was like, please be careful. Don't talk to these people. And like, my daughter was super close with Colby because they grew up together. And so I thought there was a good chance that if Lori reached out to her and wanted to like bring her into the cult, my daughter might have answered the phone and been like, felt obligated out of family to at least hear her out and see what she had to say, you know? So we had to have a serious conversation about that. And I mean, of course she was amenable to like, you know, of course she realized it was nuts and didn't want to get involved. But I was like, you know, please don't even just don't even answer the phone. I don't even want them to know that you're there. Like, Rexburg is an impossibly small town, you know. Please just, that was mind bending for me. It was crazy. So I mean, the whole thing. It was like every time something new came out in the news, and you know, there was a very small group of my close chosen family who knew that I was related to Lori and all of that, and. You know, I did have, fortunately, a lot of people who would check in on me and be like, hey, this came out, are you okay, and whatever. But it was like every single time a documentary came out or whatever, it was like being re-traumatized all over again, like having to think about my whole family and everything that was happening and so much that we didn't know. And I think for me, that was the hardest part. So when the kids were finally found, I was not surprised, but I was horrified by the implications of that, and you know, them being buried in Chad's backyard, and the, you know, the horrific ways in which they died, and you know, just realizing that human beings that I share DNA with are capable of that level of depravity and evil. That was just, that took me a long time. I was in a dark place for a long time. But I was really grateful that, you know, I did sort of have the tools to, you know, to process it and come out of it. But even the level of therapy that I had been through, nothing could prepare me for that.
Yeah.
It was hard.
Was there like an impulse to like deny that someone in your family could be capable of murder, or was it a process to even be comfortable like thinking that?
I don't think there was ever a part of me that wanted to deny that was the truth, but there was a part of me that had a hard time connecting those dots into reality. Mm-hmm. You know, it was like, I understand the things that I understand about Lori and Alex and their personality and their capability. And then there's this other wild thing that is so far gone from anything that I ever would have imagined could have happened. Mm-hmm. Yet I know it did happen. And all of the signs point to them being complicit. And, you know, it took me a long time to make those two things fit together. Mm-hmm. You know, so I think there is a human tendency to deny and to obfuscate and to sort of like push away the unpleasant truth. And for me, I had already gotten to the point where the truth was so much better for me than the lies, because I'd been told all of these lies and led to believe lies my whole life, that like things weren't that bad and this never happened, and you know, we're just going to be Stepford people and robots and whatever. So that became so abhorrent to me, and is now so abhorrent to me, that anything that that remotely hints of obfuscation is abhorrent to me. I just can't. I want the truth. I want the whole truth. And that's why I like listen to every single, you know, all the testimony and everything. I really wanted to know exactly what happened. I didn't want to be lied to anymore. I didn't want to listen to, you know, family members say, oh, there's no way she could have done that. You know, it's just so ignorant to push away all of the signs and everything that led up to it.
Well, and we've already kind of touched on this a little bit, but, you know, most people, like we've talked about with Tim Ballard or these other, like, proxy conversations for the, like, ideology of Mormonism, or it could be any high-demand group, but, like, these things where you can say, okay, see this person, Tim Ballard, see all these things, see Jody Hildebrandt or Lori and Chad, and you can see all the systematic problems at play here, and people don't want to do it because, well, then they'd have to analyze their marriage, and they'd have to analyze their trauma, and they'd have to analyze, but you had already done that.
Yeah.
And so you were already at a point where you were like, I'm not fucking around with all this anymore. Like, just give me the truth. Like, nothing, like, truth does give you, like, nothing to lose in the best way, because you're just like, if you just are following that, then you're good.
Yeah, exactly. And it is painful, and it is hard, and it's difficult. But for me personally, like, I think it's way more difficult to add to trauma by adding another layer of denial to it. You know, it's like, that's a whole hard thing to crack through. That's way worse than whatever it was that you went through in the first place. It's like, that's 2 layers of trauma now that you're doing. So why would you do that? And I too, like, I had to confront shame about like supporting Tim Ballard, because when I first started talking about my trafficking experience, I was looking for an organization to support. And I formed an anti-trafficking club at my school for my students that was sponsored by OUR. Oh, wow. And just because, mainly it was because it was church affiliated, and it looked like they knew what they were doing.
Yeah, right?
You know?
Isn't that
it's like, we trust. Yes. Yeah, we totally trust the church. Like, every program that they support is going to, and honestly, like, they absolutely supported it. That was one of the reasons that I joined it.
Yes.
But the more that I talked about it with people who sort of were in this sphere that knew some things about Tim Ballard, and told me that, like, hey, he's not a good guy, and there's some weird stuff going on over there, and we don't think this is good. And so I ended up having to go to my school administration and be like, so I started this club, and it turns out that this guy is probably not a very good guy, so I'm going to go ahead and disband it. And they were like, yeah, we're going to need you to write a letter to the parents and make sure that they know that we were not responsible
for that. Good for you, though.
Really
well, that is like
it was hard.
Taking accountability.
All this stuff as well.
Yeah, I had to go do that, and it was super embarrassing, and I had to apologize to my students and be like, hey, I want you to find a good cause to support. I don't think this is it. I don't have any proof. All I have is, like, information from people that I trust saying that they have bad vibes about this and that we shouldn't get involved, and I just want to trust that, you know, that they're telling me the truth.
What a good example for kids to learn, though. Kids never get that example.
Can you imagine if Elder Ballard, with the influence he has, used that experience to come out and talk about how, you know, even the very elect can be deceived? Like, that would be such a useful case study for Mormon people that could, you know, really enlighten a lot of minds.
But instead it was just like, we were never really that close, we haven't talked in months.
meanwhile scrubs the website.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's just another example to me of how like the leaders are always portrayed to be infallible, and they can't have any cracks, because then you start digging into, well, what are those cracks and where they come from? And then all of a sudden Joseph Smith has got cracks, and then we have to admit everything. And if we admit everything, really what it comes down to is that the church continues to tell these lies so that the people in power stay in power.
Yep.
That's the only thing that it is. And it's so that they can maintain control over this vast fortune that they have. And there is no appeal in the world. This is what's really sad to me, is that the church, one of the churches that bears the name of Jesus Christ, who by all accounts, whether he was divine or not, believed in caring for the poor and needy. And yet this church that bears his name has billions and billions of dollars at their disposal, where they could literally solve world hunger. They could literally save children from poverty and slavery. And yet they do nothing about it. And they pay lip service to, we gave over $1 billion. But when you look at how that's calculated, they're including the people who clean the toilets in the chapels on Sundays. It's just wild to me.
Yeah, it's like they'll tell a person who's hungry to give us money before you feed your kids. You owe us 10% of your money or you'll be burned alive at the last day. But then it's like 0.001% of something that goes toward humanitarian aid.
Yeah.
And so much Mormon wealth is built on the back of exploiting people in poor countries. And then for someone like Tim Ballard to have the nerve to go do that, I mean, it's really on brand, but like...
Yeah, it all makes perfect sense, and it's just the absurdity of all the connections. It's just like overwhelming.
Yeah, when you think about like the white savior complex that Tim Ballard has, and you look at also the church with their missionary program, obviously sending missionaries in to these poor countries where people are literally starving, but telling them that if they get baptized, all their problems will go away. Oh, by the way, you also owe us 10% of your income, and then try to make that a shame-filled thing about like, if you don't pay, you don't have enough faith. And it's like, well, how about if I don't pay, my kids don't eat? Well, if you have faith, your kids will eat. I'm like, no, my kids can't eat faith. They need actual nutrition.
I don't know if it's belaboring the point, but because even though you've gone through all the therapy, it still is this massive new trauma that you had to reckon with, all the Lori stuff coming to light. What was that was that a different process from your like initial healing journey, or what did you...
Yeah, because it was processing something that, nothing happened to me. It was just that, these are people that I know and love, and something terrible happened to them. And I include Lori in that because something terrible did happen to her. And yes, it was of her own making, but she became a person that I don't know and recognize, so I lost her. And Alex became a person that I don't know and recognize, so I lost him before he was dead. And again, when Lori gave her super crazy speech, at her sentencing, that was a moment for me where I completely lost any attachment to her that I had, because I don't recognize that person. I don't know who that is. And for her to dig even deeper into, I loved what Judge Boyce said, this religious rabbit hole that she went down, and that she's still there. And I think it was 100% a defense mechanism for all of the trauma that she experienced in her life. And whether there is like this thing hanging out there, did she experience sexual trauma as a child or not? And I don't think it really matters for this discussion. It of course matters, but it's like she already had this dysfunctional family system where she wasn't getting her needs met by her parents at a very young age. So there were a lot of deficiencies for which she spent the rest of her life compensating. And I think that's how we got where we got. And I have this little image that I remember, like Lori used to do my hair, and she was a hairdresser, and I just remember when she would do my hair, it was sort of like she was busy with this task that she was really good at, so she felt free to talk about things in a way that she normally wouldn't. It was most of the time this brick wall of perceived, everything's fine, I'm happy, things are wonderful, like just talking about her life in the way that like there's nothing wrong ever. when really there was all this dysfunction. But when she was cutting my hair, she would at least tell me how she felt about things sometimes, you know. And she had just a certain way that she would laugh and smile. And, you know, that's sort of the image that I hold for her now, is like I remembered that part of her. And yes, our relationship was problematic in a lot of ways, and she hurt me in a lot of ways and everything. But like the Lori that I knew was the Lori that liked to sing and dance and, you know, had this special laugh and like had this way of like, you know, kind of shaking her hair a little bit, and just the way that she would, you know, the things she would call me and just the way her voice sounded and stuff. Those are the things that I remember, just as if I had lost somebody who died. So
yeah,
definitely a really unique grieving process.
Yeah. Totally different than, you know, grieving my own trauma. Yeah. And it definitely just like comes in waves, just like all trauma does. You know, it's not a linear process. And I hope that people who are going through it totally understand that it's not this steady upward trajectory from unhealth to health. It's like a million different directions of steps forward and backward and things triggering you that you never thought would and all of that stuff. It's such a messy, horrible process, but it's also like such self-discovery and so worth it to do that hard work, because you arrive at this place of complete peace with yourself and with the world around you, knowing that, you know, all of the things that I love in my life, it's possible for me to lose those things. But if I do, I will absolutely be okay, you know? So it's a good place to be.
Yeah. It's like one thing to just begin doing that kind of work and then to like be an advocate and help other people and to lend your voice toward making change, and especially going up against people who don't understand, who don't know you, who don't know the circumstances, and who are going to just be like so toxic and horrible in response to you just shining a light and trying to be a force for healing in the world.
Yeah.
It's a really courageous thing.
Thank you. I think most especially, like, strangers on the internet doesn't bother me. It's stupid and dumb that they make dumb comments, but it's like far more hurtful for like my family members who are like, well, we don't believe you, and like, oh, your narrative was wrong, or like you don't have any validity because of my perspective on your situation, you know, and also family members who are like, well, I'm not even going to listen to your interview because I don't need to, you know? And it's like, I really wish that, like, I wish that people would watch it mainly just for the point of like, I want to know what your perspective was. And I want to be corrected if there's something that I've gotten wrong, or if there's something that I perceived in an unhealthy way. Mainly, that's what it is. So I think it's a sad loss that we as a family still cannot engage in a normal conversation about our different perspectives and how they are different and how we each bring something different to this whole situation. And I feel sad that like we as a family obviously haven't learned anything, because we still can't talk about it in a healthy way.
I think a lot of people watching will relate to that.
Yeah.
It's definitely tricky. That's an ongoing conflict with me and my family, is like, I as far as I'm concerned, we're all just learning together. And if you have any facts you can bring up, I'll look at them and integrate them. But you're telling me there's certain things we're not allowed to talk about, and that I'm not allowed to share my information or my perspective or my experience. And that because of my affiliation with the church, I just have to like stay in the shadows, and you can say whatever, but I'm not allowed to participate. And I'm like,
yeah,
what kind of family, you know?
Yeah.
And I love my family, and they've been, you know, admirable in a lot of ways, but it's tough and these are the types of toxic familial systems that we're all hopefully all trying to confront and work through.
Yeah.
Isn't it telling that you can have multiple murders happen within a family and that's still not enough to shake people? Like, the psyche is so self-protecting of like narrative supremacy.
And still just so like image-based of just like, no, just like, nope, we're good. Like that's not us. That was just like...
Yeah, in some ways, I totally see what you're saying, and I agree with that. But in some ways, it almost makes the stakes higher. Yeah. It's like I have to double, triple, quadruple down on my image, because this thing was so horrific that if I admit any little thing, then it means I'm a horrible person.
Totally.
Yeah, and it's probably hard based on what you've described. I mean, everyone is having to grieve what's happened, but most people without the tools that you've gained.
Well, I really hope that what people get from, this discussion, as well as like the broader discussion of dealing with trauma, is just that it does feel overwhelming and horrible and hard, and you don't know where to start, and you won't know where to start. But the point is to start, to do something, change one thing. And that's what I tell the people I work with all the time, is just change one thing and see where that leads you, because it's always going to lead to you figuring out what is the most important thing to change. And that's, I think, where we all want to get to.
Yeah.
So does your family have contact with Lori at this point? What is kind of the dynamic?
From what I understand, I think her mom talks to her in jail about once a week. From what I understand, they don't talk about the case because you can't really talk to her about it because she's sort of still in her delusion. But that's all I've heard, really.
It'd be so hard as a mom too, because you'd want to feel that my kid,
Yeah. I try to put myself in any sort of similar situation where I know my kid has done something terrible, but you still want to show up for them in the best way that you can.
Yeah.
And that's got to be incredibly hard. Like, I have a lot of empathy for Janice, and I don't really blame her or have any judgment for how she's handled things, because as a mother, I can't imagine having to deal with so much death and loss in her family.
Yeah.
Like, she's lost 4 out of her 6 children. So,
can you tell us where everyone can find your book and also your coaching?
So I have 2 books that are available on Amazon and really everywhere books are sold. The first is called I Walked Through Fire to Get Here. And that is the story of my trauma healing journey and basically all the different things that I did to heal and all the different systems that I exited. And it is mainly just to bring hope to survivors. And the second one is called 100 Ways to Practice Self-Care. It's just like a little booklet to help jog people's ideas about the best ways to take care of themselves, especially while they're experiencing trauma.
Oh, that's great.
And then I have a website. It's third-verse.com, as in like first, second, third verse. And that's where I have my coaching resources. I have, a lot of other resources for healing from trauma, how to find a therapist and things like that. And I also do a little free consultation for people who want to coach with me, because I really think it's about connecting and having a relationship. So I let people connect with me one time and see if it's something they want to do before I make them pay for anything. Sure. And then all of my social media stuff, I'm on Instagram, TikTok, and a little bit on YouTube. And my screen name on there is third_verse on all 3 of those platforms. I don't post a whole lot on YouTube. I haven't really dug into that yet, but most of my content that I post is about healing, about parenting, about healthy relationships and self-relationship, and sometimes about current events that come out. Mostly on Instagram, but I do occasionally get to TikTok too.
Again, it's so cool to see that you developed all these tools that eventually affected your leaving Mormonism, and how I know so many people, parents, who are like, but when they're beginning to grapple with these things of where do you raise a kid outside the church, and how do you teach good morals? And, a lot of people, it's like those are valid questions in light of all this devastating information. So it makes me really happy that there's people who are hitting the ground running and offering those resources, because we yammer a lot about everything we yammer about, but we're not experienced parents, right? It's so different from someone who's had the experience and done all the work to understand and articulate. So
I feel like I'm still learning how to be a good parent, because all of my kids are different human beings, and so I had to parent them all differently. What worked for one didn't work for another, and they're all at different stages in their lives, and so they need different things right now than they did when they were younger. So it's like this constant evolution of figuring out, how do I do this best now? And, I definitely have learned some things that work generally. I think generally open conversations are super important, things like that. But applying those things to your children as individuals, I think is something that is really important.
Yeah. kind of dawned on me like earlier this year of like, oh, I've had a relationship with a fake thing, which is this thing we call the family, which isn't really real. What I really have is individual connections with members of my family. And if I want healthy connections with members of my family, I have to invest in each person individually, not in just this collective identity that isn't really real.
That's an amazing way to think of it, yeah. And I think parenting is very much the same. A lot of people think of motherhood as a role, and it's really a relationship with the people that you're trying to nurture. And a lot of parents, too, adopt this sort of authoritarian style of like black and white thinking and like my way versus your way and like I know better than you because I'm older than you. When really I think the highest form of parenting is parent as protector first and then parent as guide. Like you're on this life journey, you get to decide how it's going to go within these boundaries that are safe for you. And the boundaries expand as you get older and wiser and understand things. But I don't, especially now, don't want to ever impose my worldview on my children. I want to present them with different ideas and help them foster their curiosity so that they can learn things that interest them and so that they can be on a journey that feels fulfilling to them, which is not going to be my journey. And that's a hard thing as a parent to let go of.
Oh, I bet. Yeah. I feel like everyone goes around trying to make little versions of themselves or unlived lives of themselves.
Right. Yes. Yeah. I never had a teddy bear, so my kid's gonna have 100 teddy bears. You know.
Oh, imagine having the self-confidence to want your kids to be just like you.
Imagine the hubris. Thinking I was perfect, so therefore my child would be just like me.
Well, clearly you're so much more than the Lori Vallow situation, but I do think it's kind of incredible that. I mean, I stay away from true crime and things like this generally because I don't really like the energy it invites into my life. But I love thinking about people that are into that and then they get connected to you because they're interested in the story. And then there's this whole wealth of like other stuff you can give them.
Yeah.
That isn't present in the true crime
is just like, here's all the sludge and toxicity.
Normally true crime is just like, be scared of this. They're going to put this on your car. It's not doing anything useful for humanity.
That's why I say it's just so beautiful that like...
It's very refreshing.
Partnered with this like dark familial institutional problem is the antidote in very close proximity, which is optimistic.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
I'm glad that you're doing it.
Yeah,
thank you so much.
Thank you. I appreciate you guys having me here. It's so cool. Like I've been a fan for a long time. It's like it's like it really is like a way. It's sort of like a little escape for me. It's like a guilty pleasure of just like, oh, I'm going to turn this on because I just love listening to you guys talk. I think you're so intelligent, and I think you have so much to talk about that's important for people to hear. And I can't wait for the claymation.
Same.
I'm so excited for that.
All right. Well, thanks for joining us. Thanks for watching.
Wait, are we going to read a chapter of Stephanie right now on Patreon?
What's your time?
Totally up to you. We totally can. I would love to dive into that.
All I've eaten today is toast.
I'll give you some snacks. We're reading Asia's Woman Fiction on Patreon. As always, we're reading the story of Stephanie, which Megan grew up reading. So what a gift. That never happens.
Because nobody read it. And if they do, they won't admit it.
You and Mindy Gledhill. Hold it down.
Nice to Charlie. Okay, bye. We love you.
Bye. Thanks for watching.
Links to all of Megan's stuff are in the description box.